Good morning, students. Welcome to the examination-based contact class for 2020. The presenter here is Ms. Iol. I will be taking you through the educational foundations too. This is really a very important section, and I hope you do listen carefully. This time around, I have decided to do some things differently because I see some of you are struggling. Some are complaining about not getting study guide. Some are complaining they are living very far in the villages and they cannot get access to materials. So I've tried this time to give a little context to what we are doing. And I do hope that you read this presentation. And again, I want you to start reading on time. I see that some of you start reading just a day to the exam or a week to the examination. And then you are calling the tutor, no, the presentation is too much, is this, is that. 2020 is still a long way. And if you start doing your work in time, by the time you get there, you will be fine. You would not need to struggle. You will not need to call any tutor. And another thing I want to emphasize here is that this is just a guide. You have got 2 study guides. For those of you who are doing Dpp Ef22, Dpp Ef22, you've got 2 study guides. The one from Dr. Brunet and the one of Nemat. And I hope you get these 2 study guides this time so that you don't have to struggle. And any other relevant materials that will be useful for this model. So I'm going to take you through the different units. I'm also going to give a little bit of context, and I hope you listen very attentively. So this examination is a very important one, like I have pointed out. It will take care of the examinations that will be written in April, June, and November 2020. I would therefore urge you to pay attention to the presentation in order to understand what I'm going to say here today. Now, the format for the examination has not changed. The April, the August, and November examination, all the examination papers, you will need to answer all the questions in them. The duration for the examination in this course is still 2.5 hours. So what are we expected to be doing during the examination? You must make sure that your student number is correctly written. Make sure that you have written the correct module code. Read the instruction on the question paper carefully and ensure you understand what is required before you start writing. People, this is very, very important, my students. Reading the instructions, trying to understand before you start writing is the first step to passing any examination. If you don't read the instruction, there is no way you will do the correct thing. So I will urge all of you to please try to read the instruction carefully before you start writing. Answer all the questions in the correct order in accordance with the question paper. Make sure you attempt all the questions. This time you have enough time to go through everything, and therefore ensure that you try all the questions in the question paper. Do not leave any question unanswered. Now, make sure to write the complete answers. Do not leave out parts of questions. I've said that. Please consider the mark allocation for each question to determine the length of your answer. This is also very important. You must always work with the mark allocation. Sometimes you have to write for 10 marks, sometimes for just a mark. You must be able to differentiate the length of your answers so that you do not disadvantage yourself when you write very little. Consider the model outcomes, what we have done. Apply your answer to the field of study. Now, this revision class, it will cover the April 2020, August 2020, and November 2020. But like I have said, this is just a revision for the 3 examinations. And we therefore have to go through this PowerPoint presentation with your study guide and other relevant materials given to you for this model. Now, for this model class, we have some resource materials. We have the Educational Foundation 2, written by Dr. H.C. Brunet. We have also the Education Foundation 2 by Mrs. Landy Lemmat. All these study guides, they are very useful. And in case you don't have any one of them, you have relevant study materials you would like to use. Please feel free to use these materials. Don't always cry about study guides when you can also go through the internet. You can also read other sources just to collect information. This is a higher institution, and therefore we have to read broadly. Now, coming to the Module Education Foundations 2 class, students, you know that this Module Education Foundation 2 is made up of 2 subjects, which you already know, the Philosophy of Education and the Sociology of Education. And therefore, questions will be asked from these 2 areas. It will be necessary to revisit the different verbs. Those verbs have been explained in the different study guides you have. Therefore, you have to revisit these verbs and their meanings in your study guide. Now, let us look at the content of the different units, and I will endeavor to give some explanation on these topics contained in the units. Now, if we look at Unit 1, Unit 1 is Philosophical Schools of Thought on Schooling. So we will be looking at the following: the meaning of philosophy of education and the sociology of education. We will be looking at the importance of philosophy of education. We will be looking at the inclusion of sociology of education in the teacher education curriculum, the philosophical concepts and how we can apply them to education. We will look at positive influences that studying the different philosophical schools of thought can have on teachers. That is for Unit 1, which deals with the philosophical schools of thought on schooling. And then we have Unit 2. The Unit 2 is on sociology of education. Here we will be looking at the concept of socialization. We will look at the agents of socialization, which will include the family, the school, the peers, and the mass media. We will look at the different types of socialization. And we will also look at schooling, and we will pay particular attention to African schooling. On Unit 4 class, we also have some things we will need to look out for. I'm giving you different units and what we should look out for, and therefore I will need you to use a study guide really. And in the Unit 4, we will be looking at the following: some virtues children learn from home, educational activities and styles of parents, which will include the following educational styles: the undesirable educational styles and the acceptable educational style. And we look at the family as an educative environment. We will also try to look at the concept of vulnerability, factors that can cause vulnerability. We will also look at the vulnerable character of the present-day family, how the family has become economically, socially, emotionally, and educationally vulnerable. And we're going to be looking at the implication of such vulnerability on education. And again, we also would like to look at how teachers can help learners who are vulnerable. These people are in our classrooms, and therefore we will need to look at how we can help them to overcome the difficulties and challenges they go through. Now, having said that, Unit 5 deals with analysis of educational law issues in Namibia. So we will be looking at the following: the functions of educational laws. And under this topic class, we will look briefly on the school board and the powers and functions of the school board, and perhaps try to advise on how we can make the school board more efficient and effective. And we will look briefly on school rules, school attendance, positive peer relationships. So these are the topics contained, and therefore I will just give a brief explanation on these things, and I would like you to go and read in details these units. Having said that, there's also additional syllabus requirement which is not contained in the study guides which we have. Maybe it's in NEMAT, but it's definitely not in Brunet. That is life orientation and the issue of poverty. That I will also look at here briefly. Having said that, let us go straight to Unit 1, where we have the following: the meaning of philosophy of education and sociology of education, the importance of philosophy of education, the inclusion of sociology of education in the teacher education curriculum, the philosophical concepts and how we can apply them to education, positive influences that studying the different philosophical schools of thought can have on teachers. So this is the unit 1, and those things we should concentrate on. And I just want to give a little bit of context so that you understand and then you read further. Now, we're talking about sociology of education. Many of you have been calling me differentiate between sociology and philosophy. Now, I want to do that here. Sociology of education is a science that that studies the process of guiding the child in respect of his or her social existence. Now, the child and the young person are educated in certain social relationships and social situations so that he or she will be able to coexist at all levels, from interpersonal to formal relationship. So he studied the process of guiding the child in order to be able to adapt to his or her social existence. So this is what sociology of education is about. And then the child, still on sociology of education, so the sociology of education, therefore, is concerned with the social life of the child. It's about the social life of the child, as well as with his or her total social situation. So here we are dealing mostly with the social life of the child. Guiding the child is a science that deals with guiding the child. While philosophy of education class is an area within the study of education. Is an area within the study of education and shares a concern for education and other matters related to education. So it's an area that shares some concern with other areas related to education. So philosophy of education as a sub-discipline of philosophy deals mostly with problems related to education. And the types of problem we will find philosophy of education tackling will be problems that has to do with knowledge and values. Now, the question is, why is it important that we study philosophy of education? Why is it important? I'm not talking about philosophy. I will come to sociology. Why is it important? It's important for a number of reasons which I have enumerated here. You can add some other reasons to this one too, some relevant ones too. This is not, I have not exhausted everything, so you can also add your own contribution here. The reasons why, or the importance of studying philosophy of education, is because it will help educators to be able to analyze and interpret opinions and reasonings used in connection with education. Secondly, we teach logic and philosophy to our educators and parents so that they can apply the knowledge in educational matters. Thirdly, it helps to engage in educational debate. Knowledge of it will help us to get ourselves engaged in educational debates and opinions and issues which contribute to democracy and transparency. And as a result, we can contribute in formulating and improving educational theories and practices. It will also help beginners teachers to become more aware of the implications of the various issues that are involved in education. It will also help to look at educational issues more objectively and critically. And lastly, the potential of the teacher to influence educational policies is enhanced, and it offers a personal, intellectual, and cognitive education to the teacher. So these are the reasons why we need to study philosophy of education, because these reasons, you can see, they are all relevant to what we do. And I have said the list has not been exhausted, so you can still add more to this list. Having said that, I want to look into the sociology of education. Why do we need to include sociology? We have seen the benefits of philosophy, but why do we need to include sociology in the teacher education curriculum or the teacher training program? The reason being that is because the society is becoming more and more complex, students. And sociology of education plays an important role in Namibia education in the sense that it helps to emphasize the social knowledge and skills needed to become socially responsible adults. And that is what we really want now. Now, sociology of education will help potential teacher to remember that we work with children who need guidance and support in becoming adults. So we working with children, they need guidance, they need our support to become adults, and that is where sociology of education comes in. If we remember today in Namibia, we have children with special needs, we have the street children, we have the marginalized children, and so many of them having challenges outside who need guidance, and that is where the sociology of education come into play. Now, having said that, class, that's about sociology of education, the benefit, and why about philosophy of education, why we should include sociology of education, and I have also elaborated on the meanings of the two concepts to you. Now, I want to look at some of the philosophical concepts and their meanings, and we have a number of them in our study guides. Like I have said, this presentation will not be able to exhaust everything, and therefore, like I have pointed out when I started with my presentation, that you will need to get the study guide and other relevant materials. There are a number of these concepts, there are so many, but I'm just going to look into some of them here. I'm looking at the concepts like ethics, what it means. It's a branch of philosophy. That's one of the philosophical concepts, students. It's a branch of philosophy that works with concepts such as morality. It deals with what is right, what is wrong, good or bad, responsibility and duty. So it is divided into three main areas. We have the meta-ethics, which is the study of what we call ethicality. We have the normative ethics, the study of what ethical truths they are and how they are known. And we have the applied ethics. This is a study of the use of ethical knowledge. So ethics is concerned with morality, right and wrong, good and bad, and is divided into three areas, which I have mentioned here. Then we have anthropology. Anthropology is simply the study of traditional societies. And when I come down, I'm going to tell you why it's important we know it. We also have what we call epistemology. It refers to the theory of knowledge, which claims that truth can be discovered by the use of the correct research techniques. You want to know the truth? Then apply the correct research technique. So it is a study of origin, nature, and extent of knowledge. And it argues what makes some belief true and others false in a specific context. Then we have logic, which is another philosophical concept. Logic is concerned with the requirement of correct and valid thinking. It distinguishes sound from unsound reasoning and different types of reasoning class. This one is made up of two parts, deductive logic and inductive logic. So I will need you to read through this further in the study guide and be able to know what they mean. We have ontology. Ontology refers to the study of being and the significance of being, what exists in the world, the self, the society, the matter, and the mind. Now, ontology focuses on the nature of reality, and it refers to the claim or assumptions that a particular research approach makes about the nature of social reality. So here we'll be looking at questions like what is truth, its existence, what it looks like, what unit is made up of. So how they interact with each other and what counts as evidence. These are what we deal with when we talk about ontology. And then we have metaphysics, examines the nature of ultimate reality. In speculating about the nature of existence, metaphysicians have not arrived at a single agreed upon definition of reality. Therefore, we are addressing the questions that the relationship between the human and nature. That is what metaphysics is about. And then how can we apply these philosophical concepts in education? Another thing I want to point out, students, here, you can see in my presentation, I have used different ink to highlight the topics, and therefore for a particular unit I'm dealing with, I use similar ink. So do not get confused. It's just to make it easy for you to read, to know where to start and where to end. Now I have talked about the different philosophical concepts. Remember, we have pragmatism, we have the other philosophical concepts which I have not dealt with here, which I will require you to go through, because if I continue with them, this presentation, I will exceed the time that has been given to me. So I will leave you to go through them. But I will highlight why we need to study some of these concepts here. I will just take a few of them. For example, anthropology. Why do we need to study it? We need to study it because we need to learn from what happened in the olden days. So we have to establish the core values that drove education during a particular phase. For example, we can discover how traditional values and cultures were transmitted to children by early Namibian inhabitants. We can also learn from them, and if suitable, apply the positive aspects. There are still positive aspects about these our cultures which we can still apply to our early childhood informal education experiences in the current educational practices and policies. We have ethics. Why do we need to study ethics? Why do we need to study it? Teachers need to help learners to develop the judgment that allows them to evaluate behavior as right or wrong. So schools can foster the growth of judgment. We need to teach students to be able to judge, our learners to be able to judge what is right, what is wrong. So we need to foster such development, as well as commitment to truth, moral integrity, and moral conduct. If we look at the society, students, they are full of so many things, and giving the students the ability to be able to judge what is right, what is wrong is very, very important. So if we look at the society, there are so many ethical issues that emerge on a daily basis. And as Namibian teachers, we have to ensure we ourselves have very high ethical values. We cannot teach ethical values if we have nothing. Therefore, for us to be able to impart these values to the students, we ourselves have to maintain very high ethical values. Know what is right and wrong, and being able to teach them accordingly to our learners. Now, logic. Why do we need to study logic? How can we apply it in education? Namibian teachers should provide learners with planned opportunities to develop their cognitive abilities, guided from a young age. Teachers should help learners to engage in logical debate, bring up interesting topics for them to be able to talk about, to plan their work logically. By so doing, to be able to think critically, know how to sequence their ideas. That is what it's about. So this is very relevant in education. So we need citizens who have very high level of thinking skills, which contribute to independence and critical thinking. Therefore, cognitive development is the continued and increasing development of logical thinking and ideas, conceptualization, insights, and perceptions. Teachers should help in the development of logical skills in our kids. We should engage them, make sure that we engage them in logical thinking. The positive. I'm going to another topic. I'm done with why we need to, how we can apply those philosophical concepts in education. Like I will emphasize here, I've not exhausted everything, still need to get to the study guide to see a lot more of them. So, but now I'm looking at what are the positive influences that studying the different philosophical schools of thought can have on the teacher. What positive influence can we derive from it as teachers? Now, the positive influence that studying the different philosophical schools of thought can have on teachers, maybe it will have to cultivate both rational person and rational society, which will help us to be able to cultivate rational person, rational society. It can provide us with foundational knowledge and administrators to assess teaching situation more critically. Teachers become familiar with the various concepts and approaches underlying education. Teachers become more open to changes and how to adapt to their teaching methodology to ensure educational efficiency and quality. And lastly, they help learners to form their own philosophy of life. So these are some of the positive influences that we can derive by studying the different philosophical schools of thought. Now I'm done with the revision for Unit 1. I'm going to revision for Unit 2. And in Unit 2, you can see from the very first, the power, I've brought it down here just so that you can follow what I'm doing. We will be looking at the concept of socialization, agents of socialization. In the agent of socialization, we'll be looking at the family, the school, the peers, and the mass media. So we might just take one or two examples here. We will not take everything because the time will not permit us to be able to do that. So we look at the different types of socialization, and I also said we will look at schooling, and this will include discussing a little bit about African schooling. Having said that, class, let us look at the concept of socialization. Socialization, what is it? By definition, we say it's a process whereby helpless infant gradually becomes a self-aware, knowledgeable person, skilled in the ways of the culture in which he or she was born. So it's a process whereby an infant that has been helpless gradually becoming self-aware, knowledgeable person, being skilled in the ways of the culture in which he or she has been born. So it is therefore the social process through which children develop an awareness of social norms. So it's a process where we inculcate social norms and values and help the child to achieve a distinct sense of self. So there are different types of socialization which you need to. I give you an assignment to go and find out what they all entail. I have here the different types of socialization we may be talking about. We talked about in the model the primary socialization, the secondary socialization, and the tertiary socialization. So these are the different types of socialization. So I give you an assignment to go and find out what they all entail. Now, the question is, what are agents of socialization? We have looked at what socialization is, where we say it's a process where helpless infant is made aware of himself to become knowledgeable person, skilled in the ways of the culture in which he or she is born. But what are the agents? How do we impart or inculcate these values and norms to the child? So we would define an agent of socialization as the persons or devices that act to carry out the process of socialization. Those persons, those devices that will help to carry out the process of socialization. Those are what we call agent of socialization. Example of those persons or devices, we give some here. For example, the school, the family, the peers, the mass media, these are known as agents of socialization because they actually the things that carry this socialization to the child. So, for example, the school and the peer of the child are regarded as agents of socialization, and we may ask how. Maybe we need to look at these two to see how. If we look at the school, which is regarded as agent of socialization, if we look at it critically, how is it an agent of socialization? How can we regard the school as an agent of socialization? And I have said here that in early childhood education in a school, maybe it may be a daycare center or a formal primary school. So it can be a daycare center, the early childhood education. So the school is different from the family setup because it does not only consist of learners who come from different cultural backgrounds, but also teachers who come from different cultural backgrounds. So the school is a bit different from the family. Family, we are members or maybe one blood. But here we have people coming from different places, different backgrounds, both learners and teachers. Therefore, it is truly a multicultural education in a multicultural country like our country, Namibia. So the school provides different forms of education, like you know. The first type of education that the school provides is what we call socialization skills, where the youngsters are taught how to form relationship with other youngsters. So the school has different types of education it provides. One is the socialization skill, where youngsters are taught to form relationship with other youngsters. And then we have another kind of education that is provided by the school, that is what we call academic education. In academic education, the learners are taught new concepts and ideas that are essential in understanding the world of work. So they are introduced to new concepts, new ideas that will help them to function in the world and in the world of work. In this way, learners may be provided with skills necessary for the acquisition and selection for specific roles in their adult life. Now, the school also provides a third type of education, which we say is a moral education. Moral education in schools instills acceptable values to the learners. Now, the moral values could inculcate the skills of citizenship needed in adult life. So we teach them so many skills and norms, how to become a good citizen, how to function well in the society. So the school also does that. So that is part of what the school does as an institution. So the school plays a vital role in the socialization of learners, like you have seen. You have seen the different kinds of education we get from school. This all prepare us for adult life. The young child becomes well prepared to be able to face the world. So these are the different, that's why we have put the school as an agent of socialization. So this is true. I'm talking about the last bullet. It is a process of learning. Learning takes place not only from the teacher or the educator, but also other learners that are found in that school and who also share a classroom. So learning takes place not only from the teachers, but also from their fellow learners who share the same classroom with them. Talking about the peer group of a child, why do we also regard this as agent of socialization? We know as the child grows, the child matures and develops into an adolescent. He or she normally will spend most of his time with his or her friends. Now, the friends are the peers of the growing child. Now, the peers refers to persons of equal standing in the society. In such instances, children start to form groups about 5 to 10 friends who interact. These people share common values and interests. So what do they do when they come together? It's interesting, and that is why we regard them as agents of socialization. When they come together, this peer group, they shelter, they protect their members, the kids, they shelter, protect one another. It gives them psychological sustenance by meeting emotional needs of affecting, understanding, and acceptance. They understand themselves, they accept themselves, and so they are able to interact very well. So it also provides them the impetus to explore. They go about exploring things. They share the pleasures of achievement. When they achieve, they are happy, but also the effect of mistakes. They share it as a group. And when there is a mishap, it's divided. It's not put on the shoulders of one person. So alleviating possible pain and disappointment. So there is no doubt, students, that the peer group is an effective learning institution because it transmits the values, the norms of the society, teaching certain roles and social expectations, and conditioning the attitudes and sentiments of its members. So another thing they gain from this peer group is role modeling, which is also extended to the peers. For example, a child may learn a particular behavior from a friend in the school. So they learn from each other how to dress, how to talk, how to carry themselves. So peers also help to define the personality. Peer groups play an important role in the determination of values, such as the type of clothing, the language, and move to adult values on issues of larger importance, such as religion, career choice. Non-adults learn the behavior from their peers as well. Having said that, class, I have talked about, can I just go back to, I talked about what socialization is. I talked about the different types of socialization. I talked about agent of socialization, those persons, devices that carry socialization. I looked at examples of those ones, the agents of socialization, and I have just tried to give a brief description of why two of them are regarded as agents of socialization, like the school, the peers. Having said that, class, I'm still moving. I'm now going to the concept of schooling. I will not be able to deal in details with this, but I'm going to be talking about specific things. Now, what is schooling? That may be the question we need to address first. Now, schooling is the means by which those who design and implement the program of instruction seek to pass on the values, the norms, knowledge and skills with the major aim to help the child to socialize properly at different levels. John Dewey sees the school as primarily a social institution which makes the child conscious of his or her social heritage to enable him or her to perform those fundamental types of activity that make civilization what it is. So it's about helping us to implement programs of instruction, to pass on values, knowledge, and skills, to help the child to socialize at all levels. So having talked about, I want to look at the concept of African schooling, how the changes that it has undergone over time. Now, we will look at it in 3 stages. Now, before colonialism, we will look at it during colonialism, and we will look at the decolonialism. African schooling has gone through so many stages, and we're going to look at that, students. Now, having said that, let us look at it before colonialism. How was it? Schooling in African context before colonialism was traditional, which you know it was mainly traditional, learning from our elders. Now, and it prepared the youth for social life in the tribe or ethnic group. That was what it was, basically traditional. Then, during colonialism, schooling was based on foreign values. These people came, they thought out their own values, their norms, and the content was introduced, which alienated us. It separated the African child from his or her African roots to a large extent. And Africans were schooled to become laborers without involving themselves in their schooling. That was what it was during the colonialism time. Then we move from there. This is a time the colonialism time was a time of foreign values and norms, and what we were taught only prepared us to be laborers without actually involving ourselves in the real schooling. But decolonialism, that is after colonialism, now there's a different move from these European ways of schooling to African-based kind of schooling, based on the African values and our needs. It was based on the character to draw out the power of the native African and fit him to meet the specific problems and needs of his individual or community life. Now, as the more utilitarian and practical educational policies began to take shape, a classical irony took place. Now, as we begin to have these educational policies and coming into play, the new ones, the modern ones, while at first we thought that while at first the European system of values and schooling was violently, we rejected it because of how we perceived it. But these days, the new tendencies, students, is changing. It is changing. So Africans suddenly, we have suddenly seen that we can get salvation from poverty, from inferiority complex, to become developed nations. So regional cooperation, globalization have forced us now to discard some of the ways of our doing things and to take up some of those previously rejected Western norms and values, so as to be able to interact, to be able to mix, so that kids, when they go out, they will be able to fit into any society. So what I have said here is that at a time when Africans suddenly saw in it their salvation, both from poverty and from their inferiority to the developed nations. So there is regional cooperation and globalization that forced African ways of schooling to adopt many of these previously rejected values and practices. So remember, during the colonialism, it was the Western norms. But now we have said, okay, we initially rejected them, but now globalization, we need to enter. The world is becoming a global village, so we need to absorb some of these values in order to fit in, to be able to participate shoulder to shoulder with children from developed countries. However, the difference is that schooling has become more balanced now. Balanced in the sense that we have integrated successfully both the traditional and the Western in order to be able to integrate effectively with those of the developed world. Now, having said that, class, I am going to Unit 4. I hope what I have discussed now made sense to you. I hope if there are questions that can be addressed to me when you go through the presentation. So for Unit 4, class, that deals with Sociology of Education, and we will be dealing here on the perspective on the family. It's a perspective on the family that is just about the family, what the family is about. So here we'll be looking at some things we need to teach the kids, students, from home. There are certain things that these kids should know from home, and that's we should definitely teach them. And we will also be looking at educational activities and styles. We have so many parents practicing different educational activities and styles, and that can hamper or enhance the development of the child. So we're going to look at all of this. We're also going to look at how the family can become an educative environment. How the family can be an educative environment, the concept of vulnerability. We will look at factors that cause vulnerability. We look at how the family today has become emotionally, socially, educationally, economically vulnerable, and the implication of such vulnerability on education, and how we teachers can help vulnerable learners. This we will cover in this unit. Now, having said that, I have tried to, from the study guide, take a list of some of the things we need to teach our children while they are with us at home, such as cooperation. I hope I don't need to break this down. They are very easy terms that we can easily, if you don't know any one of them, you can look it up in the dictionary to know what it means. We have unselfishness, not being selfish, not being self-centered. Service, be able to do things, do stuff, obedience, punctuality, conscientiousness, earnestness, neatness, devotion, perseverance. These are skills. If you don't know any of these terms, please look it up in the dictionary. These are things we need to teach our children from home. We need to equip them with this before they leave our homes. Now, having said that, I want to look at the second point in our educational activities and styles of parents. And here I'm going to be discussing it under three types of styles: the authoritarian or rejecting parents. We also have the second one, the casual parents, with a kind of laissez-faire attitudes on the way they deal with their kids. And then we have the accepting parents with democratic attitude. These are some of the styles we have seen that parents practice. But what do they involve? There are three of them, like I have said. You have the authoritarian or rejecting parents. We have the casual parents who have a kind of laissez-faire, don't care attitude. We have the accepting parents with democratic attitude. But how are they? Children who grow up in this type of parenting style, how do they behave? So I'm going to look at the concept itself, and then I'm going to look at the kind of behavior these kids exhibit. Now, if we talk about the authoritarian, is coming from autocratic, or the word authoritarian comes from autocratic, or what we call rejecting parents. These parents, they are too strict, and they deal with their children in autocratic way, and either ignore their children or show hostility towards them. They use autocratic way dealing with their kids. They show the kids hostility. They don't show love. They do not have time for their children. They don't communicate effectively with them. They don't want to know what the child is doing. Now, what happens when a child comes from this kind of home where they have this kind of attitude? We see that the child exhibits so many different behavioral problems, like they exhibit various behavioral problems, like they resort to various forms of aggressive behavior. The child is always very aggressive. Later thing, he flips up the handle. He's resistant to adults. You don't talk to him. He doesn't take instruction. He's very difficult to be friends with. He cannot even make friends. So when we subject a child to this type of parenting, it has some negative effects on the child. Then we look at the other one. This is a casual parents, casual in the way they do things, with a kind of I don't care attitude, what we call laissez-faire attitude. These parents do not have a consistent method of dealing with their children. House rules don't exist, and they merely leave their children to themselves to solve their own problems. They have no solutions to offer to these children. Children solve their own problems. How do we find these children? We find these children with some behavioral problems. They are inactive. They are never active. They are always withdrawn. They keep to themselves. In need of consistent guidance. You need to guide them. Tell them what to do. They are dependent on teacher support and help. So in the absence of people who are there to help, they cannot help themselves. Children who often dominate their own parents because they don't give them care, they don't correct them, they don't show them the right things to do, they find the children dominating them. And we have children, they have little attention, support, guidance by parents, and these children, they are generally unpopular outside the house. Then we have what we call the accepting parents with democratic attitude. This is the one we advocate for. This is the one we say is the best. And this is the one that every parent should try to emulate. Now, how are these parents? The accepting parents with democratic attitude are the most desirable and the most ideal style to educate children. Such parents express love. They show love for and respect to and patience with their children. They provide consistent and firm control and support, taking an interest in their children. They communicate with their children and guide them constructively to responsible adulthood. The result is that these children from such homes, they are usually outgoing, they are very active, they are friendly, individualistic, they can accept challenges, they are able to deal fairly easily with learning situations at school. So this is the kind of parenting style which we are asking the parents to adopt. The other two, we may say they are undesirable styles, but this is the most desirable style class. Having said that, class, I want to look at what significance is the family in our lives. What I'm going to look at it from what we call the 6 facets of family as an education and environment by Penguin. I'm going to look at what he has said about what a family should be. The first one is that he says the family environment is a living space. The family should provide a living space for the child. The child needs permanent living space. So it is the responsibility for the family to provide this space, which is his or hers, and which he or she experiences as his or her own. So there must be a space where the child feels this is mine, in which he can be himself or herself, can move freely and be carefree. It provides the secure anchorage in which the child can learn, study, experiment, and relate to adults. So the family must be a living space. Another thing which he said is that the family environment is an answer to experiences. What it means is that the child needs loving guidance in his or her exploration. At home, children find themselves and find answers to the many problems and challenges, especially during puberty and adolescence. So when the children encounter problems outside, the home should be where they have to find answers. And we really have to make our homes to be that. Home really means a place of problem solving, a base of safety and security, If the child does not get answer to his or her problems, the outcome can be intense emotional disturbance, which we do not want. Then we have the family environment is a word focused on personal love. The family is the ultimate environment of fulfilling personal needs. In order to develop adequately at a psychological level, the child needs the loving, caring focus of the parents that manifests itself in concrete deeds and invisible manner. To be a family member means acceptance and experiencing love. So the family must be a place we find love. The family environment is a social situation. The family is a community in which the child learns social virtues. Now, respect, spirit of solidarity, of communal faith and fellowship. By practicing this social virtues class, the child is being prepared to partake in broader society. The ground rule of give and take is also established at this stage. Then the family environment must be dynamic. It's not static at all. What it means is that the family represents a link to the past and the present, but must also integrate with the ever-changing reality outside the family. So the family must always try to be flexible. Therefore, family should be modern, it should be vibrant in order to be dynamic and adaptive and not static at all. So the family should represent the social community outside and should thus reflect it. Then we have the family environment is permanent. The family environment must be permanent, intimate cycle of IU relationships, which help the child to discover himself or herself and others as persons in a world of impersonal social relationships, and to arise to have given personal meanings to values and norms. Family cycles are permanent and should have an interesting history, but also a future perspective, especially for the young family, members. Now, having talked about the family class, what I have tried to deal with in this context, I looked at virtues children should have at home, educational styles, where we look at the undesirable and the desirable one. I also have looked at the family as an educative environment. Now I think I'm going to vulnerability. I quickly will go there so that we don't waste time. So vulnerability, I will briefly, you have done this in the assignment. I know you know the meaning already. It refers to being in danger of threats like physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, poverty, malnutrition, and no chance of getting access to education, preventative health, or medical care. This usually will refer you to children under the age of 18 whose mother, father, or both parents or primary caregivers has died, or who is in need of care and protection. I don't need to dwell on this because you did it in the assignment. I know you know it. And then, what are factors, class, that can cause learners to become vulnerable? What factors can make a learner vulnerable? There are a number of factors, class. Death of one of the parents can be a problem. Death of both parents can be a more serious problem. Divorce in the family, poverty, ill health, maltreatment, and the list goes on. This can make children to be vulnerable. You can also add to this list I have here. Now, but what we have seen nowadays is that the family has become vulnerable economically, socially. We need to see that there are factors that have made the family economically vulnerable, like retrenchment, illness, death. We also have families becoming socially vulnerable. For example, before we used to live together with our extended family members, but due to certain circumstances, family have to now live apart. What it means that the family is isolated, and when there is a problem, you are just left alone. You don't have this support we normally have from the extended family. Then we have emotional vulnerability. There is a threat. When we are working parents not at home, children become emotionally vulnerable. They now depend on friends. They have no one to help them to do homework. Most of the time they feel insecure and this insecurity affects the children, and educationally being vulnerable, parents not fulfilling their responsibility. Therefore, children turn to friends and television for realization, and you know what that means. From there, they learn a lot of things, both positive and negative. Now, I have talked about this different vulnerability. Will allow you to go through this Unit 4, Unit 5, and then the other thing I have also put up for you so that you can well prepare yourself. In case you have any other question, you have questions to ask on the presentation, feel free to contact me. My cell number is reflecting here now. And I want you to read, like I have said. Don't start reading a week to the time, and then you come back to say, oh, there is no shortcut. This is a higher institution, we need to read. We cannot just give you, like babies, do this, do that. You must read and prepare yourself. And so this presentation is covering the 3 examinations. And please take note, you need to prepare yourself adequately for the exam. Thank you for coming, and I wish you all the best in the exams ahead of us in 2020. Thank you.